By evening, the city was tired. Lagos always looked like this at the end of the day, dust suspended in the air, car horns losing their aggression, people walking with the quiet impatience of those who had survived another long day and wanted only to go home. The woman stood near the rear gate of the hotel, where delivery trucks reversed carefully and the smell of cooked food drifted out in brief, cruel waves. She had been there since afternoon, not asking, not calling out. Just standing, one hand resting beneath her swollen belly, the other clutching a thin nylon bag that held everything she owned. She was pregnant enough that no one mistook her condition. Her dress strained slightly at the seams, and her feet were swollen inside worn slippers. Each time she shifted her weight, she paused, breathed slowly, and continued waiting. People noticed her. They always did. They simply chose not to stop. Inside the hotel, Adekunle signed the last page of a contract that would quietly transfer another property into his name. The men around the table smiled with professional admiration. Someone poured another glass of water he did not drink. He rose, straightened his cufflinks, and nodded once. The meeting was over. Outside, his driver opened the door of the black Prado. The air smelled faintly of rain and diesel. As the vehicle rolled toward the exit, Adekunle leaned back, already half removed from the day. Then the car slowed, not abruptly, just enough. He heard a voice, restrained, careful, as though it had learned that drawing attention could invite trouble. "Sir, please." The driver sighed quietly, already reaching for his door handle. Adekunle raised a hand. "Wait!" He lowered the window. She stood several steps away, not too close, not desperate. Her eyes met his briefly before dropping again, not in shame, but in caution. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not asking for money, just food, anything that is left." Her voice was steady, though fatigue lay beneath it like an old ache. Adekunle looked at her properly then, at the roundness of her belly, at the careful way she stood as though every movement had consequences, at the hunger that had settled into her face, no longer dramatic enough to alarm anyone. There was a paper bag on the back seat, untouched food from the hotel restaurant, still warm, still neatly wrapped. He hesitated longer than necessary. Then he stepped out of the car. Security shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. When he handed the bag to her, she accepted it gently, as if afraid that a sudden movement might cause it to be taken back. "Thank you," she said. Her fingers brushed his. She looked up again. "Kunle," she said it quietly, not as an appeal, not as a test, as though the name had simply slipped out. The sound of it struck him with surprising force. No one called him that anymore. Not business partners, not politicians, not his own children. He had not heard it spoken that way in years. "I'm sorry," he said. She shook her head at once. "Nothing. Thank you." She turned and walked away, holding the bag against her chest. Adekunle remained where he was. The city noise resumed around him, engines starting, voices rising, the night pressing forward, but something had shifted. Inside the car, the driver cleared his throat. "Sir?" Adekunle nodded once and got in. As they drove away, he told himself what was easiest to believe, that names were common, that memory was unreliable, that the past stayed buried when it was left alone. But sleep did not come that night. Years earlier, Ibadan had been quieter then. The nights slower, the dreams louder. Adekunle shared a single room with a woman who believed in patience and prayer and the idea that things would work out if people stayed. Her name was M.O. She sold phone cards during the day and returned in the evening with stories she told lightly, as though hardship was something to be endured politely. She believed in him with a certainty he never understood. When the opportunity came, sudden, sharp, life-altering, it did not arrive gently. It came with conditions, distance, silence, a clean break. He packed his bag while she was away, left money on the table, changed his number, promised himself it was necessary. He never looked back. Now 3 days passed. On the 4th, rain fell, the kind of rain that flattened dust and revealed what the city usually hid. Adekunle asked his driver to slow near the hotel. She was there again, sitting this time, leaning against the wall, her dress darker from the rain, her hands resting protectively over her belly. He stopped the car. This time he stepped out. She looked up at him without surprise. "You returned," she said. "I don't like unresolved things," he replied. She smiled faintly. "Then Lagos must be difficult for you. Why did you say my name?" She studied the pavement for a long moment. Because I wanted to know whether you would recognize me. And did I? She shook her head slowly. No, his voice lowered. Acute, her expression did not soften. That name belongs to a life you chose to leave behind. You're pregnant, he said. Yes. The rest of the question remained unspoken. No, she said gently, the child is not yours. Relief arrived first. Then guilt followed immediately, heavier and less welcome. I did not come looking for you, she said. I did not know this was your hotel. Then why stay here? She met his eyes fully now. Because I wanted you to see me once. Before it became too late. Too late for what? She placed his hand briefly on her stomach. The baby moved. He pulled back without meaning to. Her voice trembled for the first time. Too late to understand what you walked away from. Adekunle did not return home immediately. He sat in the back seat as the car moved through streets he had helped reshape with contracts and approvals. Glass towers rose where bungalows once stood. Flyovers arched over neighborhoods he no longer knew by name. Lagos had grown around him, and he had grown inside it, protected by tinted windows and the quiet assurance that problems could be postponed. The woman's face stayed with him. Not as she was that evening, damp from the rain, but as she had been years earlier, standing by a roadside in Ibadan, balancing a tray of phone cards on her head, laughing at a joke he could no longer remember. Memory did that. It returned the unimportant with astonishing clarity. He told himself there was a practical response. There always was. The next morning, he called his assistant and asked questions he had not expected to ask again. Shelters, clinics, social workers. He spoke carefully, as if distance could be maintained through language. By afternoon, he had arranged for a doctor to be on standby and a private room at a reputable hospital. He sent a driver with instructions to bring the woman, if she could be found. The driver returned alone. She was not there, sir, he said. The staff said she left early. Adekunle felt a flicker of irritation, quickly masked. People who needed help were rarely punctual. He instructed the driver to check again in the evening. That night, Lagos breathed in slow, humid intervals. Power failed in sections of the city, generators humming like distant insects. Adekunle sat at his dining table, untouched food cooling before him. He tried to read and failed. Tried to call someone and stopped himself. He slept off. 2 days later, she appeared again. Not at the hotel. At the gate of his office complex on the island, where the morning sun cast long shadows and security guards greeted familiar faces with polite recognition. Because I needed to know whether you were helping because it was easy or because it mattered. The word stung. He stood abruptly. This is unnecessary. Pride will not save you. And money will, she asked. He did not answer. The hospital was efficient in the way expensive places often were. Quiet corridors, polite smiles, forms that disappeared quickly when his name was mentioned. And lay on a bed that smelled of disinfectant, her face pale but composed. Adekunle stood by the window, watching nurses move with practiced calm. The doctor spoke in careful terms. Monitoring, precaution, observation. Adekunle nodded, reassured by the cadence of professionalism. I will return tomorrow, he said to her. Everything you need will be taken care of. She studied him. Do not make promises you intend to delegate. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, she said gently, that presence cannot be outsourced. He smiled thinly. You are still the same. And you are not, she replied. He left before the conversation could continue. He did not return the next day. A meeting ran late. A flight was rescheduled. A call from Abuja required immediate attention. He sent his assistant instead, with instructions and assurances. By the time he arrived at the hospital 2 days later, the corridor outside her room was unusually quiet. A nurse approached him slowly. Sir, she said, her tone respectful but firm, she was asking for you. Adekunle felt a tightening in his chest. Where is she? The nurse gestured toward the room. Inside, M lay still, eyes half open, her breathing shallow. Machines hummed softly. She went into labor early, the doctor said. There were complications. Adekunle stepped closer. He reached for her hand. It was cool. I am here, he said, the words unfamiliar in his mouth. Her eyes focused briefly. You came? Yes, she smiled faintly. I knew you would, eventually. He leaned closer. The baby, she swallowed. He is alive. Relief flooded him. But, she continued, her voice weakening, he needs time. What do you need? He asked urgently. She looked at him with a clarity that surprised him. I need you to understand, she said, each word deliberate, that some delays cannot be corrected. The monitor beside her changed its rhythm. Doctors moved quickly. Voices overlapped. Adekunle stepped back, suddenly aware of how little space he occupied in this moment. When they asked him to leave the room, he complied, stunned. He sat alone in the corridor, the polished floor reflecting the fluorescent lights. Time stretched, thinned, lost its shape. After what felt like hours, a doctor approached. I am sorry, she said quietly. Adekunle looked up. For what? We did everything we could. The words rearranged themselves slowly in his mind. He stood unsteady. And the baby? He asked. The baby is stable, she said. He will need care. Adekunle closed his eyes. Later, when the room was still and the machine silent, he stood by her bed. Looked peaceful, almost younger. As though the years of effort had loosened their grip. He spoke to her then, quietly, without witnesses. I did not know how to stay, he said. I only learned how to leave. He waited for an answer that did not come. Outside, Lagos continued. Cars moving, generators humming, lives intersecting and diverging without pause. Adekunle remained where he was, understanding too late that wealth could open doors, but it could not return time. The child was small. That was the first thing Adekunle noticed. Not fragile in a dramatic way, not alarmingly weak, just smaller than expectation, as though he had arrived early and quietly, unwilling to demand more space than necessary. He lay in an incubator in the neonatal unit, his skin slightly translucent, his chest rising and falling with careful effort. Tubes traced gentle arcs from his body to machines that whispered and blinked in steady rhythm. Adekunle stood on the other side of the glass for a long time. He did not touch the door. He did not speak. The nurse eventually noticed him and approached, her voice low and practiced. She explained the routine, the monitoring, the waiting. Waiting, Adekunle understood. He had been doing that all his life, waiting for the next milestone, the next acquisition, the next proof that the path he had chosen was correct. This was different. This waiting asked for nothing he could delegate. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar. Adekunle began to arrive at the hospital in the early mornings, before meetings, before calls, before the machinery of his life gained momentum. He stood by the incubator, watching the child sleep, memorizing the shape of his face. The child did not cry much. When he did, it was brief, almost apologetic. Adekunle learned his name from the nurse's chart. Ifalua. He repeated it silently, testing the sound of it. A name that carried hope without urgency. A name that asked nothing beyond presence. He signed forms, approved expenses, arranged private care without needing to be asked. These actions came easily, reflexively. They were familiar territory. What did not come easily was the quiet. There were moments when he caught himself looking up, expecting M.O. to be standing nearby, watching him with that calm, steady gaze. Each time, the absence struck with renewed force. At night, he returned to his house alone. The rooms felt larger than they ever had, too polished, too orderly. The silence pressed in, unbroken by laughter or complaint or the ordinary noises of shared life. He slept poorly. News traveled quickly, as it always did. A few discreet inquiries, a polite message from a colleague offering condolences without specifics. Adekunle responded sparingly. He had no desire to shape the narrative. For the first time in years, he found himself indifferent to how things appeared. One evening, his eldest daughter called. I heard you have been spending a lot of time at a hospital, she said cautiously. Yes, he replied. Is everything all right? He paused. No, but it will be. She did not press further. When the call ended, Adekunle realized that he did not know how to explain what was happening, even if she had asked. Some truths resisted summary. Ifalua grew stronger slowly. There were setbacks, long nights, moments of quiet celebration when small improvements were recorded with professional restraint. Adekunle learned to recognize the signs, the steady breathing, the relaxed hands, the subtle signals that meant progress. He began to sit beside the incubator, reading aloud in a low voice. He did not know why. At first, he read newspapers, then books he had not touched in years. Sometimes he read nothing at all, simply speaking about the city outside, about the weather, about things he remembered and things he regretted. He spoke carefully, as though the child were listening. Perhaps he was. One afternoon, as Adekunle prepared to leave, a woman approached him in the corridor. She was older than M had been, her face marked by years of resilience. "I am her aunt," she said quietly. Adekunle stopped. "Thank you for coming," she nodded. "She spoke of you once, not often." "What did she say?" "That you were someone who did not look back," the woman replied. "She said she hoped you would learn." Adekunle absorbed this in silence. "She left a few things," the woman continued. "I thought you should have them." She handed him a small bag. Inside were modest items. A folded dress, a notebook with worn edges, a photograph taken years earlier. MOR letter 1EB9 acute NIK letter 1EB9 acute and Adekunle stood side by side, younger, uncertain, smiling as though the future were negotiable. He closed the bag carefully. "Thank you," he said. The hospital eventually discharged Adekunle into Adekunle's care. Arrangements were made, specialists consulted, a room prepared. The house changed subtly. A crib replaced a decorative table. Soft light replaced harsh fixtures. The quiet remained, but it felt different, less empty, more expectant. Adekunle adjusted his schedule without announcement. Meetings shortened, travel postponed, decisions made more deliberately. People noticed. They always did. But this time, he did not explain. At night, he sat beside the crib, watching the child sleep, listening to the soft sounds of breathing. He found himself thinking less about what he had lost and more about what had been entrusted to him. Responsibility, he realized, was not a burden when it was chosen. It was an anchor. One evening, as rain fell gently outside, Adekunle held Adekunle close and spoke aloud, though no one was listening. "I do not know how to do this perfectly," he said, "but I am here." The child stirred, then settled. Adekunle felt the weight of the moment, not heavy, but grounding. For the first time in many years, he did not feel the need to move forward quickly. Some things, he understood now, could not be rushed. The city continued its rhythm outside Adekunle's house. Traffic moving like slow rivers, neon lights reflecting in puddles, the hum of generators blending with distant shouts, and the occasional wail of a siren. Inside, however, time moved differently. Adekunle had learned the hard way that wealth could command attention, respect, and convenience. But it could not command presence. It could buy medicine, security, even silence, but it could not recover moments lost, nor undo absence. He walked through the rooms of his home in the late evening, noting small details. The toys carefully placed on the carpet, a blanket folded neatly beside the crib, the faint scent of baby lotion lingering in the air. Every object was a reminder of choices he had once ignored, and opportunities he had once abandoned. He remembered that first day, the way MOR letter 1EB9 acute, NIK letter 1EB9 acute had called his name, almost quietly, almost regretfully. That single word had undone years of self-assurance, shaking him to the core. The boardroom versus the nursery. The following week, Adekunle attended a board meeting. Executives in crisp suits discussed acquisitions, contracts, and market strategies. He sat at the head of the table, commanding attention as always. Yet his mind drifted. He thought of MOR letter 1EB9 acute, NIK letter 1EB9 acute, of Adekunle, of the days when life had been simpler, smaller, and richer in ways money could never buy. He realized with a kind of shock that all the influence and authority in the world could not prepare him for this responsibility. "Kunle," a colleague interrupted. He looked up, startled. The boardroom was sterile, formal, and distant from the hum of life outside. His colleagues saw only the billionaire, decisive, commanding, polished. They did not see the man haunted by a past he could no longer ignore. "Pardon?" he asked, collecting himself. "We need your approval on the Lagos project," the colleague said. He nodded mechanically. Words left his lips, but his mind remained elsewhere. He thought of Adekunle's small fingers gripping a blanket, of MOR letter 1EB9, acute NIK letter 1EB9, acute calm eyes that had once been filled with hope. And of all the time he had wasted believing that absence was harmless. Public generosity, private guilt. Adekunle began making public gestures. Donations to hospitals, funding prenatal clinics, speaking at charity events. Newspapers praised him, social media celebrated his generosity. Yet every accolade felt hollow. He realized quickly that gestures alone could not mend what had been left undone. M-O-R letter 1EB9, acute N-I-K letter 1EB9, acute S-calm, deliberate silence reminded him of this every day. She did not ask for recognition or money, only for his presence. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, he returned home to find M-O-R letter 1EB9, acute N-I-K letter 1EB9, acute waiting by the crib. "You did well today," she said, not praising his public acts, but simply acknowledging that he had returned. "I have tried," he admitted. "I know it is not enough." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "It is enough if it is consistent, if it is real, if it comes from here." She tapped her chest lightly. "Not from your image, not from your wealth, from here." The words lingered, leaving him silent. The lesson of presence days became weeks. Adekunle learned to measure success differently. Meetings were shortened. Travel was limited. Even calls were screened more carefully. Every morning, he arrived at the nursery to check on Adekunle. He read books aloud, spoke to the child about simple things, the rain, the city outside, the sounds of life. M-O-R letter 1EB9 acute N-I-K letter 1EB9 acute often observed silently, her presence a steady anchor. One evening, sitting beside the crib, Adekunle spoke aloud, though the house was empty. "I cannot change the past," he said. "I cannot give back the years I walked away, but I can be here now. That at least I can do." The baby stirred, moving slightly, as if affirming the truth of his words. Reflections on legacy, Adekunle began to understand that legacy was not in buildings, contracts, or the glint of a bank statement. Legacy was measured in presence. In time given, in attention held. In quiet moments where the only witness was the life one had helped sustain. He thought of the woman he had once left behind and the child who would now carry a piece of both their histories. Wealth could create comfort, influence, and power, but it could not create time, nor could it undo absence. From that night on, Adekunle made a quiet vow: no more absence, no more delegating presence to others, no more postponing the things that mattered most. He would be there, fully, deliberately, without apology. And Lagos, in all its noise, heat, and relentless rhythm, became a witness to the man who finally learned that some truths arrive only when it is too late to prepare. The morning Lagos woke that day, the city seemed unusually soft. Mist lingered over the lagoon, early traffic moved slowly, and the hum of generators mixed with the scent of wet earth after a brief overnight rain. Adekunle stood at the balcony of his home, looking down at the streets he had once navigated with ambition and disregard. Now his attention rested on different things. Not opportunities, not deals, not recognition, but the rhythms of life he had ignored for far too long. Inside the house, M-O-R letter 1EB9, acute N-I-K letter 1EB9 acute prepared a small breakfast. Adekunle sat in a chair beside the table, eyes wide and attentive, exploring the world with careful curiosity. Adekunle joined them, his hands steady despite years of unfamiliar domesticity. He poured tea, helped with toast, and listened more than he spoke. For the first time in decades, he realized the importance of silence in nurturing life. M-O-R letter 1EB9 acute N-I-K letter 1EB9 acute looked at him with a quiet intensity. "You've changed," she said. "I've learned," he replied simply. "Better late than never." She allowed the words to hang in the air, unchallenged. Word of his renewed attention spread slowly. Not through media, not through fanfare, but through quiet acknowledgement. Nurses, neighbors, and staff began to notice the difference in his presence. Where once he had sent money to solve problems, now he walked through corridors, asked questions, observed, listened. The hospital staff saw him attending meetings on Adekunle's progress, discussing care plans, not out of obligation, but out of genuine concern. It was a subtle shift, but it was real. One afternoon, Adekunle found himself walking along the same street where he had first seen M-O-R letter 1EB9, acute N-I-K letter 1EB9 acute, the street that had marked the beginning of this reckoning. He paused at the hotel gate. Memories rose unbidden, the rain, the waiting, the quiet plea for help. He saw other women now, standing with bags, their eyes scanning the crowd for attention, for mercy. Adekunle's heart tightened, but differently now. Not with shame, not with fear, but with understanding. He could not save every person, he could not reverse every wrong, but he could be present where it mattered. Presence became his currency, and for the first time, it felt more valuable than wealth. Ifalua thrived. Each day brought small victories, an easier breath, a confident grasp of a toy, a smile shared with a mother who finally felt safe. Adekunle stood by them, not as a savior, but as a participant in their lives. One evening, the three of them sat by the balcony watching Lagos slow into night. The air was warm, fragrant with the memory of rain and dust, the city's pulse softer in the dark. Adekunle held MOR letter 1EB9 acute NIK letter 1EB9 acute S hand lightly. "We cannot change the past," he said, "but we can shape what comes next." She nodded. "Yes, and it is enough that we are here." Ifalua stirred in her crib, eyes half open, small hand reaching toward the sounds of life around him. Adekunle leaned closer, brushing her hair back gently, and realized that wealth had taught him only efficiency, but love, presence, and accountability had taught him life. Weeks later, Adekunle returned to the streets that had once been familiar in another life. He carried food, but also a willingness to stay, to watch, to listen. The city had not changed entirely. Noise, chaos, indifference persisted, but he had. He walked slowly, deliberately, knowing that some lessons come only through quiet suffering. Some absences cannot be remedied. Some regrets remain, lingering in the corners of memory. Yet here, at last, he understood the power of presence, the necessity of paying attention, and the truth that redemption is not about reversing the past, but about living the present fully. The woman he had once left behind was beside him, silent but assured. The child slept peacefully nearby, a reminder that what mattered most is fragile, precious, and fleeting, and Adekunle at last had learned to stay.